I started working at Philipsburg Manor pretty much right out of college, and I started as one of the museum educators working on leading the tours at Philipsburg Manor. A lot of the students who come here on field trips are at a place where they are learning more about the world and learning more about the fact that there is a world that exists beyond themselves.
The lesson that I made for Historic Hudson Valley was all about embracing the humanity of the enslaved people that were living on Philipsburg Manor. The students had learned about enslavement and like the motivation, the profit motivation behind it. They learned about how families were separated, and I really wanted to make sure that the students were also able to see like the enslaved people's humanity and their resistance and how it empowered them.
A year later, Rachel died.
What?
She was not yet 2 years old.
How?
On the People Not Property site, we watched the story of Joan and John, a story about an enslaved family that gets separated. And the students were on the edge of their seat. And they're so impacted by the stories of kids and family that's, I think, a place where they've built empathy for enslaved people. What inspires me to teach about the history of enslavement, particularly in 5th grade, is that there are so many resources for 5th graders and elementary school students on the civil rights movement, but what doesn't exist for a lot of 5th graders is like really accurate, really thoughtful resources to teach about enslavement. Coming to Historic Hudson Valley and visiting Philipsburg Manor is such an important part of the curriculum for us this year. It's really important that kids get the opportunity to not just like learn about the history of enslavement, but to like really experience it for themselves. I think that was a big part of why I wanted to be a part of this project.
Hello, my friends. Good to see you again. All right, so we are so excited that you were able to come to Philipsburg Manor. So we are gonna go through this gate and over that bridge, and we're all gonna go into the barn. Let's go.
So the tour here at Philipsburg Manor takes people through 4 areas of our historic site, including a manor house that was restored to its appearance around the year 1750. And here we tell the story, for example, in the dairy in the basement of the manor house of enslaved women such as Susan and Abigail, who produced butter for commercial profit of their enslaver. They did a lot of tremendous hard physical and skilled labor, which they did not profit from, but Adolph Phillips, the enslaver and property owner, did make enormous profits from their work.
This room that we are in now, this is called the dairy. This is where 5 of the enslaved women, Dinah, Massey, Susan, Abigail, and Sue, they produced the butter in here.
Visitors also go to the historic rebuilt grist mill on the site of the original grist mill here at Philipsburg Manor, where they learn the story of an enslaved African man named Caesar who was grinding 30,000 pounds of flour per week at the site of the original mill that he worked in.
The flour is trapped inside, but I do have one opening right here. And this is where the flour comes right down this funnel, almost like a sliding board.
And there is a farm and barn where people learn about wheat being stored and processed by enslaved men such as Samson and Kaiser, the work they did in the fields to grow and harvest the grain, bring it into the barn. Wheat being an important crop at Philipsburg Manor, one of the main things that the Phillipses profited from, and the work at this site was done by enslaved Africans.
The field trip is really driven by their observations, their reactions, and their questions, both when they move through the rooms of the house, but also when they look at the Philipsburg Manor inventory.
So it has the names of those 23 enslaved people who we know were here in 1750, right?
At Philipsburg Manor, our central text is the inventory, which contains the names of the 23 enslaved men, women, and children who lived and worked here in the year 1750. And it's a very stark document. It's a painful document to read, and yet it is so important to us, and we value it so highly for what it has to tell us about the enslaved community. Through that document, we can come to understand their relationships to each other, their relative ages, their occupations, and most of all, their names. It's in fact essential to us that when you leave a visit to Philipsburg Manor or when you finish working with people, not property, you come away with those names, that those names stay with you because they are all the proof we have that real human beings lived and worked here absolutely without their consent, and yet they left such an indelible story that it's our privilege to share.
Yes. There's more men than women. Yeah, there's more men than women, yeah.
They were like going through hard times, you know?
This is like a normal floor, but that's like second floor, so they need like wood.
I've heard students and seen students have such empathetic, profound reactions to these stories and to this inventory. They instantly have this strong sense of justice.
Teaching this content to 5th and 6th graders is really important because a lot of students' morality and the way they see the world is starting to get shaped when they're in 5th and 6th grade, right? Like your ideas and your stereotypes, your prejudices, your biases, like they're really starting to form at this age. And the more that you can get like real knowledge about the history of the United States into kids at this age, they're taking that perspective to middle school. So my students, they're taking the vocabulary of resistance, empowerment, identity to middle school. That's now their vocabulary and they'll carry that through.